picture this for a second. There's this faint, persistent hum high up, miles above you, cutting through the silence.
Not just any aircraft sound.
You know, exactly. It's like the unseen eye, the hunter you don't see coming. And below that sound, on screen, somewhere else, there's just this stream of data painting a digital picture of, well, whatever's happening down there.
That's the world of the MQ-9 Reaper.
It really is. Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive by All Sorts podcast. Today, we're diving into the age of drone warfare, and we're using the MQ-9 Reaper, which is pretty iconic, as our way in. This exploration, crafted specifically for you, pulls from sources like a really compelling report called Lawnmowers in the Sky, some articles looking at drone ethics, and technical specs on the Reaper itself.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating, or maybe unsettling, about the Reaper is how it embodies these contradictions. It's sold as this tool for, pinpoint accuracy and counterterrorism, surgical strikes, but its use just sparks huge debate about consequences, collateral damage, the whole framework of modern war, really.
And the cost thing, too. It's supposed to be cheaper.
Supposedly cheaper than running fighter jets for every mission, yeah. But then you have these massive ethical questions that come with it. It's a symbol of American power, for sure, but also it's a technology that's spreading fast.
Okay, so let's maybe rewind a bit. How did we get here? That report, Lawnmowers in the Sky, it points to June 2004 as a really pivotal moment. What happened?
So June 2004, that's the date of the first recorded U.S. drone strike inside Pakistan. The target was Nek Mohammed Wazir in Waziristan.
Okay.
And the report tells this story about a local health worker. He was on a hospital roof trying to escape the heat, and he hears this weird, constant buzzing.
The lawnmower sound.
Yeah, exactly. A journalist later called it lawnmowers in the sky. And then, moments after hearing this sound, an explosion. That was the arrival of this new kind of warfare right there.
Wow. And that wasn't just a one-off, was it? That really set a precedent.
Oh, absolutely. It became a defining feature. Drones quickly became this signature weapon in U.S. counterterrorism across Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. Pretty much everywhere the U.S. was focused.
A symbol and controversial, like you said.
Definitely both. Potent symbol of power, huge source of controversy. It shaped how people saw those conflicts. And, it's worth remembering, as the sources point out, unmanned aircraft weren't totally new.
Right, there was earlier stuff.
Yeah, the Israelis used their scout drone back in '82 during the Lebanon War, used it really effectively to find Syrian missile sites. And that success definitely spurred American interest in developing their own drone capabilities.
Okay, so fast forward to post 9/11. This is where things really ramp up, right?
Yeah.
How did the MQ-9 specifically become this premier counterterrorism tool?
Well, after 9/11, the CIA moved fast. They started using armed predator drones, the Reaper's Predator, pretty quickly, especially in those areas with weak central governments, what some call ungoverned spaces.
Like Yemen, Somalia, parts of Pakistan?
Exactly. And initially, there were two main types of strikes. Targeted strikes going after specific named individuals, sometimes from a so-called kill list.
Okay.
And then there were signature strikes. These were based more on patterns of activity, groups of fighting-age males exhibiting certain behaviors in certain areas, often based on less specific intel.
It sounds inherently risky.
It was. And the Lawnmowers report highlights the tragic side of that. The accidental killing of Warren Weinstein, an American aid contractor, and Giovanni Loporto, an Italian aid worker, in Pakistan in 2015. That was a signature strike that went horribly wrong. A stark reminder of the risks.
Yeah, that really underscores the human cost. So the MQ-9 Reaper comes along. How was it different, better than the Predator?
It was a significant leap. Yeah, the Reaper is just bigger, heavier. It could carry a lot more.
More payload capacity?
Much more, which meant more sophisticated sensors, a wider range of weapons. Think AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, laser-guided bombs like the GBU-12 Paveway 2, GPS-guided JDAMs like the GBU-38. There was even talk of putting Stinger air-to-air missiles on it.
Wow. And it could stay up longer, too?
Oh, yeah. Endurance was way up. Over 30 hours just for surveillance ISR missions, they call it. Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance.
Okay.
And still around 23 hours, even when fully loaded with weapons. Plus, it could fly higher, up to 50,000 feet.
Which gives it better sight lines and makes it harder to shoot down, I guess.
Exactly. Better situational awareness, more survivable against some ground threats. And the communication links were better, too, so it could coordinate more effectively with other assets.
And dimensions.
Yes.
Just to get a sense of scale.
It's pretty big for a drone, roughly 36 feet long with a wingspan of about 66 feet, so not small.
Not small at all. And you mentioned the cost earlier. Was that a big part of the strategy, choosing drones over jets?
It definitely played a role. The thinking was for certain kinds of missions, particularly long surveillance or strikes in less contested airspace, drones could do the job without putting a pilot's life at risk.
Right.
And potentially, over the long run, with lower operational costs compared to fighter jets. That was a key strategic calculation.
Which brings us squarely into the legal and ethical minefield. How were these strikes justified, legally speaking? The Lawnmowers report gets into this.
The main pillar was self-defense, the inherent right to self-defense under international law.
Okay.
The U.S. government pointed to UN Security Council Resolution 1368, passed right after 9/11, which affirmed that right, and crucially, the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, the AUMF.
The AUMF, that's come up a lot over the years.
It has. It basically gave the president broad authority to use force against those responsible for 9/11. The executive branch also classified groups like al-Qaeda as unlawful combatants, which changes how the laws of war apply or how they were argued to apply.
And did subsequent administrations stick to that framework? I know the Obama administration tried to add some structure.
They did. They still relied on self-defense, but they tried to lay out specific criteria for using lethal force outside active war zones.
What were those criteria?
Generally, it had to be an imminent threat to U.S. persons, capture had to be infeasible, and the operation had to follow the laws of war, like minimizing civilian harm.
But imminent threat sounds subjective.
Extremely subjective, and that was a major point of criticism. Operating in other countries' sovereign territory was always controversial. The definition of imminent was debated constantly, and there were persistent worries about due process, transparency, accountability.
Right. People like Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur.
Yeah, he was very critical, particularly of the secrecy surrounding the CIA's program and the lack of clear accountability mechanisms.
Let's talk about the impact on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond the legal debates, what about the people living under these drones?
That's, a really heavy aspect. Claims were often made about incredible precision, surgical strikes.
But the reality seems more complicated.
Much more complicated. Reports like Lawnmowers really emphasized the psychological terror. In places like Waziristan, just the constant presence of that buzzing sound overhead created this pervasive fear, disrupted daily life, made people afraid to gather in groups.
I can only imagine.
And there are specific incidents that challenge the precision narrative. The report mentions Brigadier Abdullah Dogar's account of a strike in 2011 in Dadakel. It hit a tribal jirga, a council meeting.
Oh, no.
Yeah, resulted in many civilian deaths, and the claim was there was little coordination or warning. Even President Obama eventually had to acknowledge that, yes, U.S. drone strikes had killed civilians, though the argument remained that drones were still preferable to, say, large-scale bombing campaigns.
It's a difficult balance, if you can even call it that. Now, you mentioned ethics. Is anyone proposing ways to make drone use more ethical beyond just the legal minimums?
There are proposals. Christian Enemark, for instance, suggested 5 sort of extra-legal principles. Things like combined arms, integrating drones better with other forces, not just using them in isolation, urgent other defense, stricter justification, giving operators more discretion, but also ensuring clear human agency in the kill chain and focusing on mitigating the moral injury to the operators themselves.
Interesting. So acknowledging the human element on both ends.
Right. Because staring at a screen making life or death decisions remotely still has a profound psychological impact.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to proliferation. It wasn't going to stay just a U.S. technology, was it?
Not a chance. The U.S. tried to manage it, put export policies in place around 2015, linking sales to how the buyer promised to use them.
Right.
But China entered the market in a big way.
Yep.
China isn't part of the Missile Technology Control Regime, the MTCR, which restricts missile and drone exports.
Oh.
So they've been much more willing to sell armed drones, often without the same kinds of restrictions the U.S. tried to impose. And critically, their drones are often much cheaper. The report mentions a Chinese equivalent to the Predator costing maybe a quarter of the U.S. version.
That changes the game entirely. Who else has armed drones now?
The list is growing fast. Besides the U.S. and China, you've got the UK, Israel, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Nigeria, South Africa. Many others developing or acquiring them.
And are they being used?
Oh, yes. Pakistan, Nigeria, Iraq have all confirmed using armed drones in combat. And there are reports of Chinese drone sales all over the Middle East and Africa.
And are they using them similarly to how the U.S. did?
In many ways, yes. Iraq used Chinese Kaihong drones against ISIS. Nigeria's used them against Boko Haram. Pakistan has deployed its own drones, which are partly based on Chinese designs, against insurgents.
And presumably running into similar problems.
Seems like it. We see reports echoing the same issues. Questionable targeting, civilian casualties, sometimes due to limited intelligence or the inherent difficulties of remote operations. The pattern, unfortunately, seems to be replicating itself.
So looking ahead, what's next for drone tech like the Reaper, and for drone warfare generally?
Well, the MQ-9 itself isn't static. It's constantly being upgraded. They're using things like MOSA and SOAS, that's modular open systems approach, and sensor open systems architecture, basically making it easier to plug in new sensors and tech more quickly, better threat detection, faster updates.
Okay.
And there are new variants emerging, things like the Sky Guardian and Sea Guardian, longer range, better for maritime surveillance, and then the Mojave and the MQ-9B STOL version.
They'll stay short takeoff and landing.
Exactly. Potentially allowing operations from shorter runways or even aircraft carriers eventually. So the platform itself keeps evolving.
But the context is evolving too, right? The legal justification, the nature of the enemy.
Absolutely. That Baker Center report raises a really important point. Does the original 2001 AUMF, focused on al-Qaeda after 9/11, even make sense anymore? The groups it targets have changed, splintered, evolved.
So the legal basis might be outdated.
Arguably, yes. There's a growing call to really rethink who the enemy is in this context and maybe replace the AUMF with something much clearer, with updated legal guidelines for the current reality.
We also saw some interesting discussion online on Reddit, for example, about drones versus manned planes. What were people saying there?
Yeah, that thread hit on some key perceived advantages of drones. Obviously, no pilot risk is number one.
Sure.
Much longer loiter times, staying over a target area for hours and hours. Potentially more maneuverable since you don't have to worry about G-forces on a human body. And maybe lower pilot training costs over time.
Makes sense.
The consensus seemed to be that drones like the MQ-9 are really valuable in specific situations, especially in airspace where you already have control, uncontested airspace. They fill a niche.
But there's a flip side to that ease of use, isn't there?
Definitely. The big worry, touched on in the Reddit discussion and elsewhere, is that because drones make using force seem easier, less risky, and maybe cheaper, does that lower the ethical bar?
Could it make nations more likely to resort to force?
That's the concern, that it could actually exacerbate conflicts or lead to interventions where they might otherwise have hesitated. Easier to pull a trigger, so to speak, when your own personnel aren't directly in the line of fire.
So wrapping this up, the MQ-9 Reaper really is a lens through which we can see this whole complex era of drone warfare.
I think so, yeah. It captures the evolution, the capabilities, the deep controversies, the legal tangles, the strategic shifts. All of it.
That tension between precision and consequence.
Exactly. The promise of precision versus the reality of unintended harm, all happening while this tech spreads globally. It's a huge challenge for international security going forward.
It really is. And maybe that leads us to a final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder. As automation and AI get more advanced, what happens next? Will these lawnmowers in the sky become truly autonomous? No human pilot remotely involved making the final decision. And if that happens, how does it completely reshape conflict, global power dynamics, and our whole concept of human control over lethal force? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about.
The boundless realm of knowledge stretches before you, an infinite vista awaiting your exploration. Just as the MQ-9 Reaper takes flight to seek understanding in the skies above, your own curiosity can soar to new heights with the All Sorts podcast.
Yeah, we really hope you'll join us on this journey.
We invite you to become an essential part of our ever-expanding mission to illuminate the fascinating corners of our world. Lend your vital support to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube. Ignite the spark by giving this deep dive a like, share its insights with fellow seekers of knowledge, and subscribe to ensure you never miss our next ascent into the extraordinary.
And do check out our back catalog. There's a whole treasure trove of past explorations, past deep dives waiting for you.
Absolutely. Join our vibrant community across the digital landscape, too. Follow All Sorts podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads. That's where ideas converge and conversations really take wing. Together, let us chart a course through the vast expanse of understanding.